and welcome to the Wormhole Podcast, episode 61. I'm Charlie Place, and joining me today is a person whose debut novel was released last year and is currently sitting on the shortlist for the Author Club's Best First Novel Award. And it's great that it is. It's a very good book. The book is called The Day I Fell Off My Island. Hello, Yvonne Bailey-Smith.
Hello there. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. How are you?
I am very good, thank you. I mentioned that I had a tooth op yesterday, so swollen face and quite sore mouth. But apart from that, I'm good.
Your vocals are fine. We will be able to hear you great. So, if I give a very brief intro to the book for the listeners before we carry on. The Day I Fell Off My Island follows the early life of Erna, a Jamaican woman in the 1960s and 70s. She lives happily with her grandparents and siblings, and we see a lot of this happiness in the novel, until one day her siblings are taken by their father to join him and their mother in England, and later Erna is going to have to join them as well. We will leave it there. It's very much a has-to situation. We've got reluctant immigration and displacement here. Yvonne, I think if we start with your reading before we go on to other questions, if that's okay with you.
Okay, that's fine. So, yes, I like that introduction because what I'm actually going to read is just a few pages at the point where life changes in Erna's village, because the father of Erna's younger siblings basically is arriving to take them away from their grandparents who've been bringing them up since birth. Life in our village quickly returned to normal as we settled back into our routines of chores before school and chores after school. During school holidays, we helped our grandparents as much as we were able to on the small holdings. We hated some of the chores, like walking miles in order to find firewood, which once found had to be chopped into small pieces and tied into bundles that could be 4 times our body weight. The elaborately wrapped headbands that separated our heads from the wood often felt useless as the weight bore down on our small bodies and caused our necks to disappear into our shoulders. Heavy buckets of water carried long distances had the same effect. Once relieved of the painful load, it would take some time for our bodies to feel normal again. But despite the hard work, we were very happy children. That is, until one day, about 2 years after Mother left for England, everything changed. The first signs of wrongness started early in the morning when Percy, our proud rooster, who was a match for any alarm clock, failed to make even the tiniest of squawks. Grandma Melba had woken up anyway, and her first job was to find out what was going on with Percy. She was quick to return from the coop where Percy lived with his harem of 21 hens. In her hand, she clutched several of his purple and red feather tails. I gathered from her distressed explanation that poor old Percy had at some point in the night been persuaded with a handful of sheltered corns to leave his perch and go up to the side of the coop. The holes in the wire mesh were just large enough for him to poke his head through to retrieve the corn. His killer had been waiting. He or she had promptly wrung Percy's neck and ripped it clean off. The wire mesh was then opened up so the thief could retrieve Percy's headless body. Grandma had stepped on the bloodied head as she made her way up the path. His still glassy eyes suggested that Percy's demise had probably taken place less than 2 hours earlier. We should have heard something, but sadly for Percy, the hens who would normally squawk like crazy at the slightest disturbance had kept quiet. Grandma Melba knew that this was no ritual killing, but she decided to keep her counsel until she'd satisfied herself with who exactly the culprit was. She didn't want any stupid talk of obias and nonsense about people trying to do bad things to the James family. And anyway, she had a pretty good idea about what had happened to her rooster. Grandma followed her nose and the odd feather, and the trail led straight to Duppy Boy Briscoe's yard. There she discovered that Briscoe had hacked the bird in two, and the old rooster was already bubbling away in Briscoe's dirty Dutch pot with nothing but a red Scotch bonnet for flavour. Briscoe's only reaction when he saw Grandma was to start brushing furiously at his clothes. Grandma just sucked her teeth and walked away. Briscoe was a middle-aged man whose odd behavior had earned him the nickname Duppy Boy, because although in reality he was completely harmless, he sometimes resorted to doing bad things. He had this habit of wandering around the village talking to himself and brushing imaginary creatures from his body, which led many villagers to conclude that he was possessed by a duppy that prevented him from growing into a proper man. No one wanted the duppy to jump from his body into theirs, so it was best that he was left alone. Only the eccentric twins, Miss Merrill and Miss Blossom, would stop by his little shack to deliver him one of their strange, exotic concoctions. Him not bother for yam anything people give him anyhow, Grandma Melba commented. So anybody bother to give him food. On the occasions that Briscoe stole food from his neighbors, it was usually a fowl or a small goat, depending on how quickly he could execute his plans and make his getaway. But all of this ceased troubling Grandma at around 10 o'clock that same morning, when her mind swiftly moved on from the vengeance she'd been planning to something far more concerning. Patricia, Clifton, and Sonny came running towards her, breathless, their bare feet kicking up red dirt behind them. Grandma, Grandma, screamed Patricia. The man come with telegram for you. What are you talking about, child? What man? What telegram? The yellow man with the telegram, Patricia repeated. Pickney, move from me, Grandma said, giving Patricia a little push. Then she slumped down on a nearby rock, shoulders hunched. Her soft, dark face took on a look of defeat. Grandma was expecting the worst news, although as yet she had no idea what this news would be, or the nightmare that a few bland words on paper might unfold. Then the yellow man rounded the corner and walked over to Grandma. Morning, Miss Melba, he said. Grandma Melba acknowledged him with a nod. He took a thin, sealed blue envelope from his pocket and rested it on her lap. Then he looked over at me. Good morning to you, Miss Nurse, he smiled. I glared at the yellow-skinned man with his one wonky eye. Then I rolled my eyes and moved close to my grandmother. It was the only one of my nicknames that I had hated, and it was because the yellow one-eyed man had given it to me. I wasn't his nurse, and moreover, he'd probably brought my grandma bad news in his horrible telegram. A long time passed, and Grandma was still staring at the telegram. I wish Grandpa would return from over the hill where he was digging yams for dinner. He would have known what to do. Grandma mostly had her own ideas about things, but there were some situations when she couldn't think of a solution. It was at times such as these that she'd always ask Grandpa's advice. But he wasn't expected back for a few hours, so we just had to sit and wait for Grandma to come out of her shock. Finally, Grandma Melba picked up the telegram and handed it to me. I opened it and read out the single line of words. Filbert arrived Little Hammond. Stop. 3 p.m. Stop. Thursday, 8th March. I handed the telegram back to Grandma. Without saying a word, she slipped the crumpled paper into her apron pocket and walked slowly over to the kitchen, where she set to work cleaning away the ashes from the previous night's fire. I didn't hear her speak again until much later, long after Grandpa returned with the yams. That night, I crept up to the door that separated my grandparents' bedroom from the hall and listened as she vented her rage to Grandpa. Why this man a come our yard? Him wife not just join him in a foreign? And what him want, the sipper? How me can't tell you, Melba? Me just as much in the dark as you. Well, me not want him in my house, so help me God. Me not might do something me regret, sipper. Me I tell you, me not want that ugly Satan devil man anywhere near me picking them. Me can't forgive him for the wickedness him do for with daughter. That child was never the same person since she met that devil man. I suddenly realized that the ugly devil man was my mother's husband. My mother had given birth to Patricia 2 years after I was born. Clifton and Sonny followed in quick succession. But the man who was to become her husband had left for England without knowing that she was pregnant with Sonny. Sonny was already 4 years old by the time he returned. What me did say from time, Sipper? Him a wolf in a sheep clothing, I heard Grandma say. Percy's death suddenly took on the appearance of an omen, And it was certainly strange when 1 week later, my mother's husband arrived at almost the same time that was written on the telegram. It wasn't as if the island had a transport system that said the number 9 bus would be leaving Spur Tree at such and such a time and would arrive at Preston Station at another time. He appeared suddenly, as if materializing out of thin air, boldly standing in front of our veranda. Grandma's mood immediately turned as dark as the swirling clouds that presaged yet another hurricane. "Afternoon, Miss Melba," he said. His mouth barely moved when he spoke to her. I stood behind Grandma and watched him as his bloodshot eyes looked beyond her at the house. He was a bulky man in his 40s, already graying and balding. He looked, Grandma told me later, exactly as she remembered him. His eyes had always disturbed her. They were too close together, and the whites were always red. She thought of him as a man who was permanently angry. She didn't like him the first time my mother had introduced him in town. She didn't like him when she reluctantly attended their hurried marriage, and she didn't like him now. We continued watching him as he shifted uncomfortably from one heavy-booted foot to the other. "I did say afternoon, Miss Melba," he repeated in a louder voice, but still half-hearted greeting. In word-perfect English, Grandma hissed, "And I did hear you." Then she turned on her heels and left him standing there.
That was wonderful. I'm going to have to ask about Grandma Melba first. Could you tell us who she is as a character and if there's any influences for her?
If there's any influences for who she is and the character. So the Grandma Melba character, when I was writing that character, what I was thinking was really about separations. The book is a lot about loss and separations. And when I was thinking about the grandmother, some of the story often get told by particularly Caribbean children, perhaps African children, perhaps children from everywhere, as stories about their wonderful and almost perfect grandmothers. And definitely when you listen to Caribbean stories, children often talk about this grandmother who's kind of perfect. And I began to think that they perhaps do this because children who are separated from primary carers, they need something, I suppose. They need some kind of grounding, something to embed, a person really, that sort of create a link for them when that separation is very big, such as moving countries. And so the grandmother becomes quite a big character, I think, in the lives of many children who are separated and brought to parents or other relatives or, whoever. So the grandmother, I thought about my own grandmother and thought, I wonder what it would be like if the grandparents could be given a voice in terms of when children are removed from them. Because obviously when children are removed by parents, and often for good reasons, because they're trying to give their children a better life, lots of people are affected by that move, not least the children, but also the people who are looking after them before, and the children, their siblings, if that separation happens as well, the friends they know from school, everything really, the land, everything. So I was thinking of my own grandmother, who, of course, would never have spoken out like that. She is this tiny little person who really didn't have much to say. But I thought, why not sort of give this grandmother a really strong voice and make her a huge character? So, yeah.
So she's got a bit of your grandmother in there, and also she's representative of so many others.
Yes. She's representative of, I think, what the character she's been given is a strong character who's just as invested in her grandchildren as anybody else, as it were, as the parents, maybe.
No, she was a wonderful character. And I mean, you have mentioned a little bit about the background there with different people's grandparents and things like that. I think if we start, it's going to sound to many listeners who don't necessarily know about the story, this is going to sound completely out of place. But can I ask you, Yvonne, about your work as a social worker and a psychotherapist before we continue?
Okay, so I've always worked with people. I've had a very, very brief stint in industry, but after that, it was always with people in some form or another, including in running a nursery and then community youth work and then training as a social worker and then in 1997, training as a psychotherapist. So I'm really very used to hearing stories, and some stories very distressing, but also incredibly resilient stories as well. So the stories I've heard over the years and still do all the time really influenced my writing because I was hearing so many difficult stories about changes and transitions. I began really thinking about, well, where's the voice of children in all of this? How do children get their stories out there and let people know that actually when these transitions are happening, they're also thinking psychological beings. So there is a very kind of, if you like, psychotherapeutic influence in the writing of the book, but I didn't want to kind of latch onto anybody's particular story. I didn't want anybody to come sue me. So, it's a mixture of all kinds of things, including a lot coming out of my imagination. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely got to be careful with individuals and things, definitely. Am I right in thinking you've effectively been writing this book for a very long time then? You said about your work and things.
I've been writing this book forever. So it'll probably take me another forever to write the next one. I'm trying to write the sequel. Yes, the idea for this book came to me in my 20s. It didn't have a title or anything like that, but the ideas began to come to me in my 20s. And it really began when I was community and youth work. And I was young. I was hardly older than the young people I was working with. And I was just intrigued by some of the stories I heard from them. And they were kids who were getting into bother. In those days, you could kind of walk into the melee and sort things out. That's how it was, not like now where you might be very, very conscious about walking into something where there's an altercation going. And that's the first time, really, I began to listen to stories and observe people. I mean, I think that's what writers do, that they do a lot of observations of people and they listen very keenly to what people are saying. And, one day I thought I would like to write a book. So I've always scribbled and written things down on bits of paper here, notebooks there. And then about 8 years ago, maybe a bit longer, I put a manuscript together, a huge thing it was, enormous, and sort of covered far too many subject areas. But in my head, I'd written a book until I showed it to a few girlfriends and then like, well, I haven't quite written a book, but we really like this beginning of this manuscript thing that we've got. And the beginning was set in Jamaica. When I began to develop the manuscript, I had decided not to set it in any particular island and only came back to setting it back in Jamaica after having conversations with my editor. But yes, the idea is around for a long time. The manuscript was around for a long time, but it's now very different from the original manuscripts that I had. I honed it down really in the 2 years over lockdown. And I retired from the NHS, or rather retired from my full-time psychotherapy role. Told them I was going to write a book, so I kind of had to write one. So, yes.
The idea of telling people so you've got that pressure from yourself effectively, I can relate to that a lot. But you said about the amount that you originally had, and obviously the story's changed, but is there anything that you can tell us about the stuff that was originally in there that was edited out, anything that would be interesting for people to know about?
Well, originally in the book was always the character of Erna was always actually there, and the siblings and the relationship between the grandparents and the siblings, it was always there. And just, all the landscape stuff was there. The landscape stuff I got by just going back on a lot of visits to Jamaica. It's a very beautiful country. The book kind of wandered around the world because I'm also a traveler. So that's not now in there. That may be in a different book. But yes, what I built on was the early bits of the book.
Traveling around the world, yeah, do write those extra books as well. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. You said about grandparents, you said about the people you worked with. If I may ask you, how much of this book is informed by your own experiences as someone who's emigrated from Jamaica and come to England?
Well, I'm definitely an immigrant. The book follows my own timeline. So Erna is roughly about the same age as me. I think she's a little bit younger. And I also came to London as an immigrant. And like Erna, it was a very, very strange place to be. I mean, the differences such as, for example, Erna talks about the journey of leaving the Caribbean, her memories of the Caribbean or of Jamaica, her memories of arriving here. I don't actually have those memories, bizarrely enough, which I think tells us something of what a traumatic experience it is that in my case, it's not for everybody. So, this is not a misery novel. This is really a book about resilience. It's not just about the impact of migration, because I'm very happy with my life, thank you very much, but like Erna, I didn't want to be here. I really did not want to be here. I did not want to leave Jamaica at all, and I couldn't imagine. I, like Erna, I'm brought up in a little tiny village. I have no idea of the outside world. Couldn't understand things like plane journeys. I mean, on Monday I was at my daily walk with a girlfriend, and we were looking up into a very clear sky at the jet planes going overhead from a park. And she said, "Oh, I'm glad we sat down, thank you." So just we sat down for a bit. And the memory of watching these planes way up in the sky and not being able to imagine that there are really people in them, how they got up there, like, and how they came down again. Yeah, so all of that is kind of based on memory. But I don't remember my own journey. So I've created the journey for Erna. I really don't remember my own journey. I can remember being here. I can remember being very cold. I can't really remember very much. I just remember everything being cold and people being weird and life being really strange. Suddenly not being able to just be outside in the way that I would be outside as a kid in Jamaica and stuff like that, and everything having to be planned and all of that. But yes, so that is true. And I was separated from my siblings too. So those are all charting some of my own story.
Were you able to reform your relationship with your siblings later?
Oh, yes. My relationship with my siblings was never broken. I had 5 siblings. So yes, absolutely.
Oh, good. And I mean, yeah, you said it about you forgetting the experience of coming over. And did it take a while for you to get used to being here? We see Erna's experiences.
Yeah.
How much relation is there, I suppose, between the kind of things that she's got to get used to in yourself?
Yeah. It took a long time. Going to school was very strange. Getting used to the people, getting used to the food, all of that, like Erna, was very true for me. I mean, there seemed to be nothing very inviting at the time I came to London to keep me here. And I simply couldn't understand why people came here. Of course, in those days, you also got a lot. I mean, I still get it from even today. Lots of people start saying, "Why have you left your nice hot country and come here?" And you tell me. I mean, obviously, as I grew older, I began to understand the whole thing about economics and parents trying to do better to make a living so they can support their children. And these people were extraordinary. I mean, people like my mother was an extraordinary woman. She's now 91. The things that they had to do in terms of work, they had to work so hard. She worked so hard to provide for us. And of course, the separation, the reason that children are separated often, because that's the only way parents can afford to bring them, 1 by 1, 2 by 2, because they have to find the fare while they're trying to pay for mortgages and things like that. That generation, my mother's generation, all owned their own homes because nobody would rent them homes. When they came. So their journeys would have been pretty ghastly. And I very much stand on my mother's shoulders and my aunts and uncles, all the people who came before me. But yes, at first, as a teenager, they seemed absolutely nothing. Leaving this beautiful, wonderful, sunny, amazing, fruit-laden, fresh food-laden island, and lots of friendly people who say good morning every morning, and you can just drop it in people's houses. You don't have to plan anything. You don't have to call in advance. My school friends, all of that, all the people I knew. It was a nightmare. I hated it. I really hated it. And if I had had the means to get back on a plane and go home, I would have done. But of course I didn't, because I was a kid and I had no money. My mother didn't have any. But I think at some stage, my mother actually contemplated, when she saw how unhappy I was, I think she did kind of contemplate, whether she really ought to send me back home. But I mean, yeah, it didn't happen. And, of course, I'm glad it didn't happen. I went, I can go and come now as I like. And yeah, I love it.
It's good to hear it. It worked out and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got Erna and we've discussed various inspirations and stuff. And I'm going to go on to something quite different now. But I wanted to ask, the structure of the novel, you've got half of it in England, roughly half, and then half in Jamaica. And during the portion in Jamaica, and as we've heard in your reading, you've got the use of Jamaican patois. Can you talk about your choices here to use this and stuff like that?
I don't know how deliberate the choice was. I think it was when I started to write the book. I think particularly when I was thinking about the grandmother, I was thinking about, grandma speaking in what we call patois. Sometimes we call it nation language, because it is actually a proper language. So, I could have written the whole thing in standard English, but I think for me, it was a connection back with my island. It was a connection back, I suppose, with my grandparents, long, long dead. My grandmother's been dead they've both been dead for many, many, many years. And kind of listen to these voices of elders and think about the storytelling and the lyricism that goes into the kind of oral traditions. And so I don't know that I deliberately decided, but it just seemed to come very naturally that I would tell part of the story using nation language, using Jamaican patois, which wasn't that easy because I've lived in this country for over 50 years. And I go back, and there's a bit in the book without wanting to give it away. Erna goes back to the island. I think that's towards the end of the book. And she's speaking patois, speaking the nation language. And basically she's been told by her fellow Jamaicans who have not left the island not to speak English because they don't believe she's speaking patois properly, even though she thinks she sounds great. So I had to do a lot of checking with Mr. Goodall and the proofreader, and also Professor Carolyn Cooper, who was reading the book the night before it went to press and still correcting patois in the book. But as the book developed, I felt, well, yes, as Caribbean peoples, we have had to learn so much about our English hosts on so many levels, including we're taught standard English in schools. So I thought, well, what is wrong with writing my book partly in one of the languages of my birth and without footnotes, so that people who read it actually have to just take time to read it and understand it in the same way that I would read when I'm trying to read, for example, one of the hardest book ever. Is it James Joyce's Ulysses or Kafka's? But they're not easy. You have to literally slow yourself down and really try to understand what you're reading. So I thought, yeah, it's fine to write in patois. And then, of course, after I finished the book, I discovered that because I didn't read at all whilst I was writing either, discovered a whole raft of new writers who have actually also chosen to use, for example, I've just been reading Lisa Allen Agostini's The Bread the Devil Needs, and she's written in her very lyrical Trinidadian accent language. And the spelling is not as different as it is in Jamaican patois, because all the islands speak slightly differently. But yes, and it's lovely to read it, lovely to hear her reading it as well. So yes, so it became a deliberate choice.
No, it's lovely because with explaining things, you have effectively got a repetition there. Whereas when you take that out and you get people understanding, they understand more and you get rid of that repetition as well.
Of course they do. Absolutely. We're human beings, and it's amazing how much we can understand, even sometimes when people are speaking completely different languages to the one we know, or simply waving their arms about. We have a way of working things out. So I was confident that it was the right thing to do.
No, definitely. You said something there about Dr. Cooper looking through the book the night beforehand. Was anything able to change here? What happened with that?
Oh, yes, we held the book back from press because I think it was sent to her, a physical copy, and it might have been sent online as well. I can't remember what the holdup was, but, she's an incredibly busy woman. But, for me, it was very important that she read and hopefully like the book. She certainly did, and she loved the book, but she could immediately see, because patois has very specific spellings and grammar and way to use the grammar. It's not an accidental language. It is a proper language. And when it comes to Jamaican languages, she's a proper linguist. And the culture and the use of Jamaican language in writing, she's right up there with the best. So she was great. We were just working all night. She was sending me things back, and I was on the phone and on email to the publishers. And we got it done. a few things still need correcting for the paperback. But she was brilliant. She was absolutely brilliant. And I think we have credited her on the paperback. Didn't have time on the hardback, but yes.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah, a kind of a stop the press moment in a literal form. Yeah.
It literally was. It literally was stop the press. It really was, because it had already been read by a proofreader, but I have no idea who the proofreader was. The publisher had set up the proofreader. I'm sure the person did a very good job, but there was still lots of things missing, and some words sound the same, a bit like English, different meaning. So you had to make sure that whatever follows before or after convey the meaning that you're trying to get across and things like that. And yeah, Carolyn was brilliant. I mean, she writes whole articles. She's a journalist as well as a professor, and she writes whole articles sometimes in nation language, and they're brilliant. And you read them without even stumbling.
I will find some links to her work and things for listeners to check out. I'm going to move to a completely different topic now. I hope that's all right. Mm-hmm. But we have Erna and her siblings' mum, Violet, and she is someone who's kind of at the periphery of the novel for quite a while they're living with Grandma Melba. For a while, she seems like she's obviously someone who needs to be away from her children to gain employment, to get some money. But there's a definite distance there that it takes a while for us to work out what's going on. Can you tell us about her creation and things like that?
I think the creation of the parent characters, I think a lot of children, when we come and join parents, we often really don't know who they are. And I've had so many conversations. I've spoken to one man, and who's also happened to be a good friend of mine, who is 60, and is 6 or maybe 61. And he's one of the very few people who told me that prior to coming to London, he was really prepared. But most children don't have that preparation. From wherever they're coming from, I can't imagine what it must be like for children who are coming as refugees and things like that. But there's that separation. And I think one of the reasons, I'll answer the question in a bit of a roundabout way, but one of the reasons that the publisher, Candida Lacey, who read the book first and loved the book so much, is because it also reminded her of her early experiences. She was born in Hong Kong, as was her brothers, and she was saying she was cared for in the main by, I don't know what they call the Chinese women who look after English children. There's a name for them. But was then brought back to England when her parents, I believe, thought she was getting a bit that the relationship was too close, and her brothers were sent off to boarding school at age 7. I think, in that vein, a lot of children don't actually know their parents very well. And if you're a teenager when you arrive, it can make that whole situation quite strained and strange, because teenagers are also at a developmental stage where they're not that hot on parents anyway. They'd much rather be within their friendship groups or whatever. But for some people, like myself and Erna and so many other young people, that's the time you're kind of really meeting your actual birth parents properly. For the first time, you're supposed to have a relationship with them, and it can be very weird. So Violet, clearly, she's got all her children now together, but she doesn't really know them and they don't know her. And nobody quite knows how to deal with each other. And at the same time, Violet is in a pretty horrible marriage and perhaps doesn't have the kind of psychological space really to deal with her children, who she's probably seen as difficult. And there's nobody there for her either to help her think through or understand what's happening to her, manage the difficulties she's experienced. And so she begins to descend into mental unwellness. And, that is also something that happens. I think I wanted to bring out some of the big things that do happen, not hide, just bring them out, some of the big things that do happen in families out of the open. Because I think particularly in Black families, I think that Black families experience so much in those separations and just in life in general when they move to a country like UK or places like United Kingdom or other European countries or the Americas or Canada. And sometimes they just really feel they can't take anything else on. So Violet is struggling because she hasn't found the life that she had hoped for when she came to England. And now she's joined by her children, and I guess she's not feeling equipped. And the children don't know how to help. So she's a bit of a slow burner, this Violet.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is my reader interpretation, I suppose.
Mm.
But I know that we've obviously got Erna. We've got the novel through her narrative, through her eyes, and it did strike me more towards the end. When we've seen so much going on with Violet, how it seems that so much of the story is actually Violet's story. That this book is Violet's book, maybe as much as it is Erna's.
Yes, I think it's Violet's stories, Erna's stories, Erna's sibling stories, it's the grandparents' stories. I think it's pretty much all of the characters. I think I was trying not to have any kind of really flat character in the characters in the novel. I think I wanted the story to be told, if you like, from different person positions, different points of view. So I think it is Violet's story, but it is Erna's story. It is the grandparents' story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Can I ask a question that's unrelated, and then we're going to go back? You have a small section. Well, okay, there's a particular paragraph that deals with it, where Erna is in her secondary school, and she has a counsellor, a teacher, who has been telling them about the students about university, and they've left Erna and other black children out, and then she has to kind of have a conversation about university herself. Was this a usual thing that happened for black school children at the time and following?
I think so, very much so. I think the miseducation of black children in UK schools has been going on forever and still does, very much so. I think black children were just, in the main, were not thought about in terms of their achievements in the same way that perhaps, middle-class white children were. Maybe white working-class families might say the same thing about their children. I think there was a massive belief, and I knew that very much, that because also parents didn't go turn up at school, that they weren't interested in their children's education. But they didn't turn up at school because they're busy working their socks off to try and maintain their kids. They just didn't have that kind of time. Which certainly when I became a parent, I turned up at everything, literally every single thing. Things that I didn't understand. Jumble sales, tea parties, all kinds of weird things. But I'm like, I'm going to make my presence felt, because I don't want my children to miss out on, I want the teachers to know that I'm very much interested in my children's education. But yes, I went for a number of years to these huge meetings that would be held at, is it Elizabeth Hall, I think, near Whitehall, down from Victoria, where I think it was Dan Abbott used to have these enormous gatherings for black families to come together to talk about what was going on in the education system and the failure of black children, particularly the failure of black boys. And when I came here, it was a lot of black boys were being put into what they call educationally subnormal schools. There was nothing wrong with them. They were not being taught, and they were perhaps not concentrating, a lot of them, because they were being ignored in the classroom. And so, what happens with children when they're ignored in the classroom, they often turn to bad behavior. And also, just very recently, I had a conversation with, I have to be very careful here, with somebody, I shan't say who the somebody is, but who various things were happening to the young person as a child. And that's really in very, very recent history. And so the child was going to school and acting out, and nobody asked her. Nobody asked the child, what's going on? Is there something happening? They basically put the child into an educationally subnormal school. And it's not even back in my day. This is just in very, very recent history. Nothing wrong with the kid. Things were happening to her that she needed somebody to ask her about. So yes, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of the black child just being basically put down, ignored. I wish I could say it differently, but there really was. The expectations were very different for black children. But of course, there were always some very determined black parents. So even in my generation, there are lots of black kids going to university because their parents were on it. But for those parents who perhaps couldn't be saw on it, it was problematic for sure. Yes.
Mm-hmm. It needs to be better. Very much so.
Still needs to be better. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Here we go. Another question again. The title is very interesting. I love it. And there's just so much in it and to consider. Can you talk about the title, its importance to you, how you came to choose it, or if you chose it, etc.?
Oh, that's maybe the funniest part of my book. I think when I rewrote the manuscript, not in the last few years, but I put it away and I'd written this huge manuscript and I printed it up and I put it in my filing cabinet and just didn't look at it for ages. And whenever I went back to it and decided that I was going to try and develop the island story, as it were, it just popped out of my head the day I fell off my island. I think I even wrote it on the manuscript as a working title. It was a working title. And another title never appeared. And when I came to submitting the book, nothing had still appeared. It was just still that same title in my head, The Day I Fell Off My Island. So, I had a mentor at one point and he loved the title and publishers loved the title. I liked the title. It's just that it just fell into my head, literally. I thought it would have a different title, but I just thought for me, it was really weird. I write the title and then I begin to do the writing, and which is the same thing I'm doing with this, trying to work on a sequel. And it's a title that seemed to have come first. This time it came more thoughtfully, more deliberately.
You've mentioned the sequel there. When I finished the book, I ended thinking, my goodness, I want to know more. I want to know where Erna's going to go from here. I want to see further of her life. So hearing that you're making a sequel, it's really, really good. I'm really, really happy. Is there anything you can tell us about it? And also, when can we expect to see it?
No idea when you're going to see it. It's taking a long time to see this one, so I have no idea. But the sequel is going to, I think, obviously, Erna will be there, and Erna has a best friend, Jennifer, who will be there. The siblings are growing up, of course, so the boys' lives are beginning to come together. So there's going to be various things, I suppose, a bit of injustice and all that sort of thing, and a bit of romance, and Erna's career maybe taking off and stuff. And I hope a good love affair for Erna. Patricia will come back briefly. The Auntie Madge and Uncle Herbie is still there because they're bringing up the younger children. I think maybe some new characters will appear, but I know when I finish the editing, when I finish working on the edits with my wonderful editor, Vicky Heath Silk, I think for both of us, we just really, really, really miss the characters. I really miss it. I lived with these characters solidly for the last 2 years. But for 2 solid years, I lived with the characters. They were in my head. I go to bed and one of them would pop in to tell me something that I should write. Or first thing in the morning, I'd get up and characters would be chatting away to me. So yes, I thought, it'd be good to work on a sequel. It's not proving easy. But I'm trying to break the back of it at the moment. And then I'm going to go to Jamaica for 6 months from September. I've had a little teeny weeny place near the ocean to see if I can write the sequel, which is all set here, but will be written in Jamaica. So that's quite interesting. But yes, so the title for this I like, it's called The Freedom of Birds. Don't mind saying that. Put it out there so nobody else uses the title. So that's what it is.
It's nice to hear the title, and I'm assuming from past experience then that this title might stick as well. It might be The Freedom of Birds.
Yes, I quite like this title. I'd like it to stick. I will see how I make it stick.
Yeah, just I'm excited to see what's going to happen with Erna, and everything that you said about other parts of the book. It's just all come together. Very exciting, and I'll stop saying exciting because I've said it too many times.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yvonne, it's been lovely to have you here today and talk about The Day I Fell Off My Island and the upcoming Freedom of Birds. And hearing all your stories has been absolutely incredible. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Charlie, for having me today. I really enjoyed the interview. Like I said, not sure how upcoming The Freedom of Birds is, but it will get here one day.
We will wait. We will definitely wait patiently. Links to purchase The Day I Fell Off My Island are in the episode description. If you have enjoyed today's discussion, do subscribe or follow the podcast on your listening app of choice. The Wormhole Podcast episode 61 was recorded on the 14th of April and published on the 23rd of May 2022. Music and production by Charlie Place.